All right, awesome. Is everybody seeing this MPO new member orientation screen? Okay, awesome. So the intention behind today's orientation is for any new board members and alternates, committee members and alternates, or anybody that generally is a member of the MPO that hasn't necessarily seen an orientation before and understand what happens at the MPO. And so this is more of an overview of proceedings and major activities and things along those lines. As an overview, like I was just saying, this will go over, what's an MPO, the introduction to them, how they came to be, the composition of what the DCHC MPO is, which for most people, I'm pretty sure you're aware, it's the Durham, Chapel Hill, Carrboro Metropolitan Planning Organization. And then we'll go over the governing documents as to what the MPO is required to meet federally by the state and so forth. And then some of our major work activities that we do. So what is an MPO? The MPO is a transportation policymaking and planning body. So we have a representative set of people who represent the MPO, who are government and transportation authorities, anybody who has transportation at the forefront of what they're looking to do, anybody from the region. The basis of MPOs was started in 1962 with the Federal Aid Highway Act. This required urban transportation planning for funding. So at this point in time, any urban populations of 50,000 or more people became your MPO. And this is also the birth of the 3C process, which is the continuing, cooperative, and comprehensive process, which we'll cover on the next slide. A few years later, the Housing and Urban Development Act came on, and that gave new federal grants for regional planning efforts, also made sure that elected officials were represented on the board so that they also played a role in what happened in the MPO area. And this is generally the foundation for what we know as the MPO today. 15 years after this point in time is when DCHC was founded. And then in 1991, you have the Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act, which gave more authority to MPOs. Prior to this point in time, there was more authority at the state and federal levels as to what the MPO could actually accomplish. So certain things that happened was it increased local participation and encouraged integrated strategies, so working with a lot of members within the region. So the 3C process they were talking about earlier, continuing, cooperative, comprehensive. Continuing has to do with the population growth and land use. So one of the major things today is making sure that what's happening out there land use wise is actually working in tandem with the transportation plans that we're trying to set forth. So if you don't have good land use planning to say, for example, how large is a road? Can a bus fit down that road? If you're not planning for the size of certain things like that, then it doesn't really work for the transportation that you generally want to be put in place. Cooperative wise, that's regional communication. So it works both ways. It's jurisdictions, agencies communicating to one another and all at one time, making sure that we all understand everything that needs to happen and what we can create priorities off of that kind of information. And then comprehensive, making sure that we are looking at safety, connectivity, who has access, where are things located, all the little things, air quality, everything that we could possibly be looking at, making sure that all stakeholders can be brought in and make those decisions together. In North Carolina, we are one of 19 MPOs. This is pre-census update. So I believe that the Pinehurst MPO has been created as of that update in the past 2 months now. But these are the general MPOs. You'll see in this beige area are the RPOs, the rural planning organizations. So there's a good amount of MPOs out there that we can compete with funding throughout the state, and we'll see more information on that later. But this also helps with coordination to talk with other MPOs and understand what they're doing. You can see that most of the MPOs are on top of each other, so making sure that what you're doing in that region or MPO area happens in the other MPO areas across border lines, and that helps with like state highway projects and things along those lines. So for the DCHC MPO, this is the boundary as it stands, again, before pre-census. So you'll see some updates coming in the next few months for a new map. But essentially, the MPO boundaries are Durham County, as well as part of Chatham County and part of Orange County. What makes up the MPO are, you have all the member jurisdictions and agencies. You'll see more information on this. There was the board material or the orientation materials that were linked to in the chat. That'll show more details on who all of the members are, who all of our board members are, technical committee members are at this moment in time. But it's essentially bringing everybody together to make sure that we plan for the entirety of that MPO. So member jurisdictions and agencies, you have it at the town level, city, county, you have the universities that are brought in, you have to talk with the state, make sure everything matches what's going on at their level and so forth. You have the transit agencies. On the MPO board, you have voting and non-voting members. So the board ultimately goes through and approves what the MPO wants to do, what this boundary map is showing. This is the MPO area. So this is comprised of voting members that are local elected officials. You have the NCDOT Board of Transportation and Go Triangle. You also have a non-voting member, the Federal Highway Administration. The technical committee makes recommendations to the board for their approval. And those technical committee members are staff members from member jurisdictions and agencies. And then in those materials that I was talking about earlier, you'll see who the voting and non-voting members are. For the most part, voting members align with the same level of the board. So you would say Town of Hillsborough, Chapel Hill would be some of those voting members. Non-voting members would be some of those federal and state members. And then you also have the lead planning agency, which is MPO staff, which I am a part of. So we'll go over how many people are actually a part of the MPO staff later, but the lead planning agency basically puts together the technical review and documentation for consideration from the committee and board members. The governing documents that we have to follow, these are, I believe, all of them, the main ones, but we have the Memorandum of Understanding, which lays out the requirements of the MPO. You have the bylaws for the board and the technical committee, which tells the purpose of each of those member groups and what they're intended to do. You also have the State Ethics Act, which you want to make sure you're making ethical decisions. So we make sure that we follow that. For board members, there's actually a requirement to fill out a statement of economic investment, your information for how much you make, and real estate disclosures and things along those lines. And then you also have our public involvement policy, which tells you how much we will be reaching out to stakeholders and why we reach out to them, and who we're trying to reach out to and things along those lines. So governance roles goes back to the board and the technical committee and MPO staff. Those are the main roles. So for the board and the technical committee, you have similar levels of participation. So monthly meetings, there's also committee meetings that can happen based on requirements and things that need to be discussed. You also have other project type meetings, you have citizen communication. So making sure that any decisions that are being made or discussed, you talk about with the citizens of those areas. As I mentioned before, the board does have that ethics filing requirement as well. For oversight from the board side, they approve the decisions for the MPO. They advocate MPO priorities and provide guidance. The technical committee also provides guidance and helps advance local transportation projects. At this point, when items do get to the technical committee and the board, a lot of communication has happened between a lot of the different member agencies. So before the technical committee might look at something, they'll already have heard that Chapel Hill was looking for this information to get moved along, or there's a lot of communication that happens in the background before anything usually makes it to the technical committee and then up to the board. And then you have the MPO staff that carries out directives from the board, as well as plans, models, and does financial management. And so on this next slide, this is the lead planning agency organizational chart as it currently stands. You have the Doug Pachinski, who is the executive director. We also have that financial side. So you see David Miller up here. And then you have the more planning side of things and more of that modeling side of things. So right now we have 2 vacant positions, but overall we have, I believe, 11 people. So 2 of those are vacant right now. So for our major plans, those are the CTP, MTP, TIP, and UPWP. And don't worry, we'll go over what those actually stand for on the next slide. So to give you an idea of how these plans interact, you have the comprehensive transportation plan that has the largest planning horizon. That is a state requirement and is about 30 or so years of planning. There is no update requirement, although it can be amended and has been amended. And at this current point in time, our last update was in 2017. The next lower level is the MTP, which has a planning horizon of about 20 or so years. That is updated every 4 to 5 years. And it was just adopted, I believe, back in 2021, 2022. So it's pretty recent. And that is our 2050 plan. The next level down is the Transportation Improvement Program, the TIP. And that has a planning horizon of 10 years. That gets updated at least every 4 years, so no more than 4 years. Right now, it's in the fiscal year 20 to 29 category. It is being updated this year, so that'll become the FY 24 to 33 plan. And then you have the Unified Planning Work Program that's updated every single year. So at the beginning of the year is when you start hearing those discussions about updates for the fiscal year, which starts in July. So for more information on the comprehensive transportation plan, this is required by state. It is that 30+ years, like we said before. This is all potential projects that would be happening in the MPO area. So this is comprehensive. This is getting together everything that we're looking at that potentially could happen in that time frame. This doesn't have a funding constraint or an update requirement. And it, like we said, it can be amended and has been amended. So it's not like this just sits there and we never look at it again. This is something that does get amended as things do change. The MTP is a required document by federal statute. It is fiscally constrained, so the expectation is you won't really be moving around from what that budget was. It is a subset of the CTP just because that comprehensive plan is supposed to cover all possible projects and is a slightly larger time frame. This past one was done joint with the with CAMPO, which is the MPO out of the Raleigh area. So that's the capital area. And then that was done as a joint project to make sure that we do continue doing things on a regional level and make sure that we're communicating so that if we need commuter rail, that if it doesn't get done in one area, I can't continue on to the next area. And this provides the project set that would be considered for projects in the TIP, which is the 10-year program. This past one was adopted in 2022. The Transportation Improvement Program is also required by federal statute. It is a 10-year document. The first 6 years are the delivery TIP, and then the last 4 years are the developmental TIP. Sorry, the TIP is part of the STIP, and we'll go through that momentarily. But essentially, it's 10 years. The first set of projects are committed projects, and the second set of projects are developmental projects that get prioritized when the next set of documentation is adopted. But we'll go through that a little bit later as well. All the documents in the TIP must match all the documents or all the projects in the state TIP, and projects must be in the MTP. So if projects that are in the TIP that are not in the MTP or vice versa, then something needs to get amended to reconcile those items because all projects should match in both of those documents. This is where projects actually do get funded. And this is also going to be updated this upcoming year. So there's a lot of conversations out there about things that are potentially updating. You might have seen something on swaps, which is having to do with some prioritization, which we'll discuss in the next slide. But basically, the TIP is the result of state prioritization. So that state prioritization came about based on the Strategic Transportation Investments Law, and that determines state priorities and essentially gets funded in 3 funding tiers. So all projects are considered first at a statewide tier. If they are not considered to have gotten a high enough score, then the remaining projects in that level can go into a regional scoring process and so forth. It can be a very complicated process. It might be worth taking a training on it if you are interested. It would be spot training. But essentially what happens is this prioritization happens prior to a new TIP adoption, which does happen, like we said, with a maximum of 4 years. So usually it's every 2 years or so. And there's a prioritization scoring process that happens at the state level. And so projects are prioritized, scored, and then could potentially receive funding. And those projects then can become committed in the next adopted plan, which would be happening right now. We're in the 7th prioritization scoring, and that won't those projects that are being scored won't actually make it into the 10-year TIP until FY26. So right now we're working on the FY24 will be the next adopted plan, and these projects going through prioritization won't make it into the next one until the FY26 plan. So it's a little bit further planning out. It is a 2-year process. There's also local prioritization for how we do projects in the area for funding that we receive. So we receive federal funding. There's a few different sources here. So There's the Surface Block Grant, which is the first one. You have transportation alternatives, carbon reduction, and then congestion mitigation. This is the funding that we recently had for our last LAP program. So basically there's a scoring process to see how all project applications would fare in terms of being able to get funding for their project. So there are a set of criteria that all applications get scored under, and then the top scoring projects will receive funding. And so that's funding that the MPO directly receives and then can allocate out based on that scoring and decisions by the technical committee and the board as to which projects are considered and funded. But all those projects must have a 20% local match. This is intended to prioritize local projects, whereas on the last slide, sometimes the projects that end up getting funded could be more state or regional funding because they might score better in the prioritization process or things along those lines. And there are so many people competing. So this is intended to be specifically for the MPO, the DCHC MPO, to have projects receive funding if they didn't in that process before. This is also usually managed by local jurisdictions, but it is not always the case. You do have a couple of things that are not, such as if NC DOT were to manage some of the projects in within this. And then you have the unified plan, which is that 1-year plan, basically says how the funds that the MPO receives will be allocated out based on population size, things along those lines. Some of these grants are specifically for transportation agencies based on what their actual function is. There's also just general oversight items that go in here, but it's a 1-year working plan. And then there's also other planning work that the MPO does. This is not a comprehensive list, but it includes things along the lines of county transit plans, so participation in staff working groups. So we have that ongoing right now. There's also bike and pedestrian planning. You have the congestion management process, the CMP, which is a requirement for DCHC MPO because we are a TMA, which is basically when you have 200,000 or more people, you become a transportation management area, I believe is what it stands for. And then you're required to have the CMP. And you have a few other things like the transportation demand management, which TJCOG is responsible for doing, which is basically looking at all the different things that are happening out in the area and how we can mitigate some harmful effects of like air quality and things like that. And that is the overall presentation. I hope you guys learned something from it, but if you have any questions, please unmute yourself and go ahead. Oh, okay. Sorry, I do have one question. Sorry, is there a cheat sheet of all the acronyms? Yes, thank you, David, for sharing that. This PowerPoint will be available along with the recording on our website as well after this presentation is complete. Are there any other questions?
Kelly, someone asked for a cheat sheet of acronyms, is that right?
Yeah, and it looks like David did send that out. We also did have that in the orientation materials at the end of that document. It should have everything in there. If there's a question on something that's missing, please don't hesitate to let me know. We do have a lot of acronyms, and I apologize for that can be a little bit confusing sometimes.
Okay, I have a question. This is Camille from Chapel Hill. How do you not get dismayed at the amount of time it takes to get things done? You know, as we were looking at those layers of the comprehensive plan, 30 years and then on down. You're in this business. What do you do to keep yourself energized and motivated?
I guess I'm so for those of you who don't know, I'm still new to this position. I've only been here for about 3 months doing this job. But it is important to know that these plans are in place for a reason, and the intention is to have a comprehensive understanding and make sure everybody is involved in this process. And yes, it might be 30 years out, but that time can creep up very, very quickly. And if we don't plan for all these small things, then we can never make it into those 1 or 10-year plans to make sure we can accommodate for all the growth that is happening and expected. Because we do know, for example, that this area is growing a lot. It's growing a lot, and the amount of things that will need to change to accommodate for that growth is a slow process based on funding, but it needs to get done and it needs to be prioritized. And it's just important to know that everybody needs to have their input here so that we can understand how we can do everything efficiently and make everything beneficial for the overall population. I hope that sort of answers that question.
It does. Thanks, Kelly. It does. It is. I appreciate the that it's a plan, that things may change, that this is some of what I heard. Priorities may need to be reset. And you're also trying to be inclusive so that because of how big the changes will be. And there will be change because we are growing. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would just add, as those projects come into focus, as they become part of the TIP and identify the funding, then we have to start looking at alternatives, conceptual designs, just working on all these details, and the MPO is involved in that work as well. So just besides the prioritization and all that work in the long range plans, there's a lot of detailed work as the project goes from concept to a better, to more details, and then to final engineering and what have you. So a lot of detailed work. As they say, the devil's in the details, right? And we do quite a bit of that.
Right. Thanks for pointing that out.
I have a quick question. I always do the orientations. It doesn't matter how long I've been on the MPO because it's helpful. Just real quick, and this is just a curiosity. Do we do analysis, around how we do transit here versus how other parts of the world are doing transit? Because consistently, I feel like in the US, we deliver projects a lot later. There's a lot of bloat in our system. And so as transportation planners, do y'all do some of that analysis and comparison? Are there ways for us to lobby for changes in our processes? Because, 30 years to deliver something, I mean, everything's changed on the ground at that point. Like if we think about, 885 right now, right? That it just, the entire kind of ecosystem of that area has changed since that road was initially kind of conceptualized. So just curious to hear from folks who are professionals in the field.
Yeah, of course. I do know that there have been ways in which the MPO has looked at those items. I don't know to what degree of analysis has happened in the past or ongoing, but I do know that there are certain seminars, conferences, also just understanding different levels of what people are doing and whether it could apply. So if it's something that is outside of the United States, is it something that we could accomplish here? Or is there a different way in which we could manage that, but have to do it differently just because of the way regulations work? there are definitely some major differences between how we are set up versus internationally. But it is something as a comprehensive measure that the MPO does look at to make sure we're considering the elements of, you know, what is possible and what makes sense. Yeah, based on what is needed. I know it doesn't always work out exactly how we want things to be. However, that's what we're striving to get to, right? Is making it as flawless as we can as a process, but still having to rely on funding and how much we have to be able to accomplish those things. I do know that there were MPO members who, for example, went to Germany a couple years ago to understand how they did things. I wasn't a part of that. I don't know if anybody on the call might be able to help me answer that question a little bit better.
Yeah, Kelly, this is Aaron. I was actually part of that group. And yeah, one of the really enlightening things that came out of that trip, well, there were a couple of things. One was that some locations really were able to make cars a more secondary consideration in the design of their streets and the design of their layouts and so forth. They really emphasized non-motorized vehicle transport modes first, especially on some of their more secondary roads. And they were able to have narrower streets. There was one place where they actually had a roundabout where bicycles had the right of way over cars, and cars had to stop to let the bicycles through the roundabout. They also were able to do some things in terms of mixing of modes that we simply would never consider here in the United States at this time because of safety considerations. For example, outside one of the train stations where they have the buses and the trams come through, people are walking, biking, the trams are coming through, the buses are coming through, and there are no fences, there are no guidance, there's nothing. It's just, you walk through there and you make sure you don't get hit as you go through. The kinds of things that we would never do here. I think the other thing that was very apparent was that in the United States, as we're trying to put together, say, a transit project, we really do put an emphasis on making sure there's going to be ridership, and we have ridership models that still assume a very car-centric view of transportation, where they just simply don't have those considerations over there so much. They can put in a new tram line, rail line, commuter rail, something along those lines, and they don't have to have as much justification from a ridership and cost benefit perspective that we do here. So that's just a couple of things that come to mind from that trip.
Thank you, Aaron. I hope that answers your question, or to some extent.
Yeah, I mean, it just becomes a political question then. So it's up to, I guess, for the folks to, I think one of the strengths in our system, both at municipal level, is that we are professionally run. We don't have the same turnover at the top political, at the top executive of our organizations in the same way that maybe a strong mayor system would. So we really rely on the folks who are the professionals to tell us the opportunities we have to push for changes. Because what I'm seeing is that we're not going to get the transit we need in this country until we fundamentally change how we do it. And I understand that a lot of that is federal regulation. Thank you, Caroline. But then that still becomes about lobbying electeds to push for those changes, push for that change. Thank you.
Sometimes personally, I like some of the slowness because I don't want them to go through environmental phases. I don't want them to go through the community input phases too quickly, on any project. Then you can end up with something you don't want. And I'm just speaking personally, but we have, Javier, we have changed several projects here. NC 98 looks a lot different than it did a while ago, several years ago. 15501, the vision for 15501 is changing, and in a lot of people's mind, the vision for the Durham Freeway is changing. So some of these projects that we've had in the past, it's taken a long time, but it's been good because I think the vision of what's going to be out there had time to gel and make a change. So
Definitely.
Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, I'm not hearing anything. So thank you everyone for joining today. If you do have any follow-up questions that you'd like answered, please please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Again, my name is Kelly Fomenko. It's Kelly Fomenko at DCHC MPO.org. Please let me know. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly.